So the international health regulations were actually created in 1969. So now we're talking about a totally separate document. So everything I said before, that was for the framework convention that they're negotiating. Does not exist, but they're trying to make it happen. The international health regulations were agreed to in 1969. They were amended quite a lot in 2005. There were a couple little changes since then, but for the most part, for the last 20 years or so, they've been in operation. Now, the one aspect of the international health regulations that almost no one is aware of is that they required that every nation create an office in your government. So the Japanese government has an office. I don't know the name of it, but it is essentially referred to in the IHRs as the National IHR Focal Point. So that's the name for an office in your government. And they're obligated to be in communications with the WHO 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time. And so, in my view, that is when the WHO actually infiltrated every government in the world. Every country in their government structure has an office, the National IHR Focal Point, that must communicate directly with the WHO. And so last year in May of 2022, they agreed to a resolution that said, okay, all of the nations, if you want to amend the international health regulations, this existing document, please submit all of your proposals by last year, September 30th, 2022. So 94 nations, including Japan, but interestingly, Japan's proposals have been kept completely secret. So if anybody in Japan has access to it, please let me know. But interestingly enough, even though Japan was said to have proposed amendments, they were kept secret. So 94 nations submitted 197 pages, a total of 307 amendments to an 84-page document. Okay, so that's a lot of changes. And so that was kept secret from September 30th to mid-December of last year. I've been reporting on it because they finally made that public in mid-December of last year. And there's a lot of things in there that are very, very, very objectionable. But the main thing that I would like to focus on today is Russia proposed an amendment that said every nation would be obligated to enact legislation within your nation to give authority to that office, the National IHR Focal Point, to make sure that all of the other amendments are complied with. So the game that the WHO is playing is they're saying, if you agree to these amendments, your nation will have to enforce what you've agreed to against your own people. Okay? So in nations where the national government was very aggressive in enforcing mask mandates or vaccine mandates or lockdowns or quarantine or travel restrictions or whatever, the WHO is saying you have to empower this office in your government to do what you've agreed to under these amendments. Now, arguably, they want to say, well, that's not a loss of sovereignty. It's a very tricky way of getting all of the nations to do what they want, but shifting the responsibility onto each nation. So, various nations around the world have been outlandishly abusive of their people's rights and freedoms. Now, I wouldn't say Japan was the worst. I wouldn't necessarily say they were the best, but some nations absolutely abuse their own people. And so what they're saying is go do that all over again, however you want to do it. Because quite frankly, as bad as the WHO is, Australia and New Zealand and a whole lot of it, Canada, were off the charts horrible. Okay. So the problem ultimately will be local. Whatever it is they find to scare you with, the local governments are the ones who ultimately you deal with, right? I mean, it's obvious the people in your own community who are, saying this is what you have to do. Ultimately, this battle will be a local battle where your local government, your local police and health authorities, now, instead of saying, well, the WHO is recommending this, right? They would say, oh, well, there's this treaty and there are these, amendments to the IHR. It's legally binding. We have to do this. Well, every nation's laws are different. Every, individual has to deal with a different situation. So it's not a one-size-fits-all universal problem. The problem is that locally, if your own neighbors and family and friends are confused as to what is actually going on, and they just listen to authority, they're likely to get tricked into doing things that are not beneficial for them, but they do it because they're told to do it. And the person who's telling them claims to have authority and justification. But as we've seen over the past 4 years, that's very, very fraudulent. It's a money-making venture that will convince many people to abuse the people in their own nation. Okay. Now, a lot of what's in the proposed amendments, when people in the media talk about it, they just say the treaty. Okay. And so it's all mixed up. Now, last year, 2022, the World Health Assembly did adopt amendments to the international health regulations. A different set, there were only 5, but they did adopt amendments.
I am asking you if the committee is ready to approve the draft resolution in question. I see no objection. Therefore, the resolution is adopted with these amendments. Therefore, I repeat, the resolution is approved with amendment.
And the process is where people have a cognitive dissonance. They think that the way it should be is if the World Health Assembly adopts changes, those changes should come back to the Parliament or Congress or Senate or whatever legislative body and be voted upon. But that is not how it happens. Okay, I'm just going to repeat that. Amendments were adopted last year, and they do not have to come back to the legislative body for approval. There's an 18-month period where the prime minister or president or maybe the health minister or an ambassador, whoever speaks for the nation, could just write a letter to the WHO and say, well, under Article 61 of the International Health Regulations, for our nation, we reject these amendments. That's all it would take. A notice, a letter written from the prime minister, health minister, ambassador. Nope, not for us. Okay. It's an 18-month period. that ends on December 1st. These were adopted at the end of May 2022. 18 months. We've already gone 15 months. Mm-hmm. There are still 3 months, September, October, November. December 1st is the deadline. If a nation rejects the amendments from last year, then it just doesn't apply. All the other nations could accept it, that's fine. But if the Japanese prime minister wrote a letter to the WHO and said, we don't want to accept, we reject these amendments, that's all it would take. Mm. But nobody's talking about it. Now, the reason I'm talking about it is people, mostly in the United States, when they hear about these proposed amendments, they go, oh, well, the Senate will never approve that. The Senate isn't going to get the opportunity. Mm. That's not the process. There's nothing in the international health regulations that says if they agree to amendments, then it has to come back to the nation to be. No. That is not part of the rules. And so anyone who says, especially in the United States, oh, well, the Senate would have to give their advice and consent. You got to have 2/3. No. This is the problem that people can't recognize. These negotiations are going on in secret. We have no idea what the current status is. We're not allowed to see the working drafts. They're going to have a meeting in October. They're going to have a meeting in December. They're going to submit it to the International Health Regulations Review Committee. It's going to be presented to the WHO in January. Have no idea when, if ever, we'll get to see it. And then they're going to vote on its adoption in May of 2024. And then it's not coming back for approval. It doesn't need a signature from anybody. When they approve it, it's approved. Okay? And so the time is now, right now, to learn about this, raise your voices about this. The latest article that I published is called thepeoplesdeclaration.com, thepeoplesdeclaration.com, and all the information is there. And near the bottom of that article, I have over a dozen websites that I've put together over the last year about the amendments and every aspect of this. And I'm readily available. You know, you reached out to me. It's wonderful to get to meet you, you know, on Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp or text message or phone call or whatever it may be. It's expected that people should have questions about this. Okay. And I'm happy to try to answer anybody's questions. But remaining silent is interpreted by the way they operate as if you don't say anything, then that means you do consent. Your silence is treated as consent. And I do not consent, period. No, this is wrong. Many people, many doctors used their experience and their wisdom, and they saved thousands, if not millions of lives. They should be the ones who are talking about, well, how would we go forward in the future if something like this ever happened again? Because they actually treated patients and saved lives by the, you know, tens of thousands, if not millions. But they're losing their licenses. They're being kicked aside. They're being ignored and abused. And, you know, we cannot allow that to happen. In a sane world, we would have a huge investigation. We would explain what actually happened, what worked, what didn't work, and then we would actually learn a lesson or more from the past couple of years. They say they've learned lessons, but the lessons they've learned is just how to control people, how to manipulate information and censorship and propaganda, and how to make a whole heck of a lot of money selling something that harms people. That's not the lesson I learned, but that's the lesson that they've learned. and they're trying to expand what they did by an order of magnitude. The WHO's budget in 2022, they spent 3.8 billion. 1 billion of that was for salaries. They have 8,851 people who earned an average of $120,000.
Oh.
And they only spent half of that much on actual medical supplies. Okay. This is not about making you or I or our loved ones any healthier. This is about them having more control, more power, more authority, more ability to censor and manipulate the information and propagandize people so that the cronies that they funnel all this money to can make more money while they're making people sicker. And then those sick people go back for more drugs and jabs, and more money is made by what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. So I'm speaking out against this because it's just wrong. And because they're keeping it hidden, most people are completely unaware. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. Thank you, so very much.